everybody. Welcome to the 2018 Reason magazine editorial juggernaut, Webathon telethon. Is that what we're calling it?
No.
Webathon.
It's just a web. No, but this thing.
This is a live podcast. A live podcast.
We're a live podcast. So this is the Reason Editors Roundtable special edition. We usually do this on Monday, so go there on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and subscribe to it all. But we're doing it especially on Wednesday of this week in conjunction with the Reason Webathon, our 11th annual attempt and a pleasurable week having of asking you, our favorite people in the universe, to give us your tax-deductible donations to make all of our journalism and commentary possible out there. We want to welcome everybody out there, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or at Reason itself, whether you're libertarian or not, whether you're struggling with your faith, please enjoy us. And all throughout this live video cast streaming thing that we're doing, send us questions. The mechanisms by which you can send those questions are at an email address that I don't have in front of me, and also by comments on the blog post that we have at reason.com right now, and on our Twitter feed, and on etc. I am joined, as we always are, or usually are, on the Reason Editor podcast by Katherine Mangu-Ward, editor-in-chief of Everything Reason.
Hi.
Nick Gillespie, some guy we found on the street, and Peter Suderman.
What's that?
Cheers,
managing editor of Reason.com. That's not
Internet.
true. Nick has been off the street and high on Reason for more than 25 years.
That is correct.
That's
25 plus. I started in October of '93.
So it's you and Bob Poole at this point are kind of the longest tenured Reason people.
There's also Jacob Sullum has a discontinuous record that's longer because he was here first, but then left and then came back.
He ascended briefly to a higher plane of consciousness and then rejoined us here on the
Was he using
plane.
alliterative headlines even in 1992?
He's the worst
Yes.
headline writer in history.
Yeah, okay.
He's just an
No,
absolute
not
monster.
true. He just wrote really high quality 90s headlines. Headlines are just
No,
different
they're
now.
just bad.
Why the
puns.
past tense?
Yeah.
He doesn't write headlines anymore.
So, and then also Barb Birch, actually, our
That's true.
former art director, who now is helps out with certain elements, also predates me by at least a couple of months.
That's amazing.
What we're saying is we've all been around forever and you should pay our salaries.
Not exactly that, but we're going to get to that in a second.
Yes.
You can contribute to the payment of our salaries and our booze habits. So to go and give to us, again, tax-deductible donations. It could be in cash. It can be in cryptocurrencies. Go to reason.com/webathon. And if you're writing about any of this right now on a social media platform, do the little hashtag buddy and then Webathon 2018 at around the commencement of this particular broadcast. And this is day 2. We've been doing this for a little over 24 hours. 2 great posts from Nick and Katherine already on this, although tomorrow's just
God, I knew the minute you said something nice about our Webathon post, I was like, he's going to say his is better.
It's not about me. It's just about the found material that we have. Not going to spoil it. However, from this time, so we're doing a week-long Webathon. We've had about 200 donors, I see here, which is an incredible number. I think, in fact, it's even more than maybe the first Webathon that we did 11 years ago, and a total of around $36,000 in donations. Thank you. That's amazing. Let's see about making those numbers legit over the next 60 to 90 minutes or however long we are here.
I think we got to double it otherwise.
You think we double it,
Yeah.
or else?
Yeah.
Are you going to set yourself up for that kind of?
Yeah, I'm going full Buddhist monk.
Okay. I mean,
Okay.
I thought the vegan thing was kind
You're
of.
going to go quietly meditate?
I'm just going to pour gasoline over my head and light myself on fire.
So you're going to go
We're
quietly
gonna have
meditate,
s'mores, yeah.
please,
Yeah, we were going
instead?
to have s'mores this afternoon anyway in the office. So.
That's true.
I wish we had office s'mores.
Yeah.
Sure, that's against a fire code of some sort.
At any rate, there is a matching donation system that's also still available to us right now. I'm going to read this off of a teleprompter known as my computer because these are sometimes difficult to describe. One Reason donor has agreed to match the first $25,000 in gifts during this telethon from people who have never given before to Reason over our last 11 years of doing this, and also just in the history of Reason, or who increase their giving. If they increase their giving, another donor will match that increase from last year's total by another $25,000. And I'm pretty sure none of that makes sense the way that I just talked about it, but that's not the fault of the person who wrote this. Let's go to questions. because we have a lot of them, and I'm already tired of hearing myself talk. This is a good way to actually start off. Tony Fluharty from Facebook, and sorry for mispronouncing your last name. And your first name. Why does Reason need to beg for donations, Katherine? A business shouldn't be in business if they don't have a profitable business model. Begging for money isn't a sound business model, just a thought.
I love for a magazine called Reason, this is a very reasonable question. It's a strong place for us to start. So, two things. First, Reason is published by a nonprofit, has been since 1978. And you may have noticed that lots of other journalistic outlets are just now getting up in that game because we are totally ahead of every single curve. Is that not true, Matt Welch?
Pretty much.
All the curves.
Even the begging curve?
Especially the begging curve.
First.
And journalism that is published by nonprofits has a lot of advantages, and one of them is that we are not beholden to advertisers. We are not beholden to anyone really, because so many people give us money that we get a lot of freedom and flexibility out of that. So thank you for your donations, and thank you for your question. And not all businesses are justified by their profits, as even Ayn Rand would remind us.
And also, these are parts of our revenue model itself, too. I would add to what Katherine just said that the total number of donations actually makes us more flexible. There's no single person on this earth who, if they totally change their mind about Reason tomorrow or keeled over or whatever, any calamity can happen. There's a single person on which Reason's existence depends, with the exception of possibly Nick's or Bob Poole's, to be frank about it. However, that's because we have this diversified portfolio. Opinion journalism, magazines of opinion journalism, they all either have a rich benefactor who, when they get bored with losing money, suddenly change their mind and then the magazine goes per quacky, or they have a nonprofit model, or they just lose money hand over fist. I would just invite people to look at the modern history of the New Republic to see what it's like to not have a stable nonprofit model. Let's go to a question for Peter Suderman from Brent Cordner of Twitter. Says, should libertarians be in favor, and he spelled that with a U.
We got a Brit up in here.
It's Canadian, even worse. Of universal health care when it is not achievable via an unregulated market. Peter?
So I have written in the New York Times, no less, that in fact what we need in America is a party that says that we don't need guaranteed comprehensive coverage by the government. And so if that's what you mean by universal health care, I think my answer is no. If what you mean by universal health care is the maximum number of people with easy, affordable access to health care, I think libertarians can and should be in favor of that. There are different systems that you could design and think of that might get us there. The system we have is not that.
Any additions from our other crowd here? We're good in letting us.
Well, I mean, isn't it kind of? Is there any reason, Peter, to think that healthcare would be different than food ultimately? That a free market, relatively unregulated or lightly regulated, ends up throwing off enough wealth as well as enough different stuff, where healthcare, as opposed to having health insurance or having a gold-plated health insurance plan, virtually everybody would be taken care of. And certainly not everybody in Canada goes to the doctor when they need to. So.
If your question is there any reason? The answer is yes, and that would basically be Arrow's theorem, named after the economist Kenneth Arrow, who made a quite popular, influential argument that healthcare is fundamentally different from all other market goods. And so this is kind of the big tension in a lot of thinking and arguments about healthcare, is that people who sort of think it should be part of the market basically think, well, that it works basically like food, that it works, not too different from food or from housing or from automobiles. And housing and automobiles also have subsidies attached to them, but that the market basically, that people can be informed consumers. And Arrow's argument was, you cannot be an informed and intelligent consumer about healthcare because of two things. One is you don't know your own condition, and two is the treatments are too complicated. I think that there is I think that it is not an entirely fallacious argument. On the other hand, it goes he and a lot of folks have taken it way too far, and you can have market mechanisms spring up to take care of the information asymmetry.
The last
well,
time
you
I
can't
checked,
have them spring up though in the market, in the extremely regulated, almost entirely government dominated, even where it's theoretically nominally private system that we have right now.
And you can have charity too, right? So like when accidents befall you, when suddenly you go to the doctor and your headache requires 4 expensive treatments in 36 hours in an ambulance ride over the East River, hypothetically, you're not price shopping, but in a system where you're a waif, back when stuff wasn't crowded out, you'd have a charity hospital.
So I mean, the kind of the ideal model that a lot of folks talk about, who are more market oriented, is that you buy health insurance when you're young, when you get out of college, when you are in college, when you're in high school, even when you become an adult, before you find out what's going to happen to you in the rest of your life,
so
before the insurance company
restaurant,
finds out. Right, if you're working at a fish restaurant in Florida with a bunch of alligators, and maybe you have to get the alligator rider. I don't know, but so this is how it works. Roughly
alligator rider is another great job that we should consider having. Actually,
I mean, in fact, the fish restaurant that I worked at had an alligator wrangler. But let's talk about let's get back to the healthcare part, right?
Yeah, let's get back to healthcare.
The thing, the idea is that you buy it when you're well, and when the insurance would be cheap, and then you keep that plan through the rest of your life, and perhaps even buy a guarantee that is like an add-on. There's some research suggesting that these would be quite inexpensive. That you buy your insurance, and then you buy an additional sort of top-up guarantee that says they can't raise your rates. And you do that when you're 22 or 25. And you keep that insurance unless you get a better deal, because people would compete in this market rather than the crazy job-attached health insurance market that we have right now. You keep that insurance for the rest of your life, keep paying these sort of keep paying that low rate, or a rate that rises at some sort of pre-negotiated reasonable amount. And what this does is it detaches health insurance from employment. It makes it portable, and it means that everybody has a reasonable incentive to pay into the system without, say, a mandate, which we sort of don't have anymore.
Let's move to a question that I want to throw at Nick here from Carlos Diablo, hit and run commenter. It seems to be standard reason dogma now to feel that borders should be completely open and unchecked. Do you feel that this is a radical notion, and do you feel that this should at all be tempered given the complication for this implemented by the ever-growing social safety net?
One of, I think, the biggest problems that we have in talking about immigration policy is that the use of the term open borders, meaning the idea that there are no borders or there are no checkpoints, there's no vetting of anybody done. I think I know when I write about open borders or invoke it, and I suspect people, the rest of you as well, what it means is that you go to a checkpoint and you present identification, and there's a background check on you to see if you have communicable diseases or a criminal record or fleeing from someplace. If you don't, I think the presumption should be that you're allowed to come to this country, live legally for as long as you want, work, etc. That's what open borders means to me. It's not willing away the idea of borders for all sorts of reasons, and also most people, you land at an airport, you're already at a place where you're going to be checked one way or the other. You cross borders on roads that have checkpoints and things like that.
But what to the social safety net aspect of it? So I come in, I pass the anal probe at the border, and now I want to get all the way.
That is new.
Anal probe was my drinking game word, so
there
here we
you
go.
No, but if there is a tension between immigration, having more immigration, and a safety net, I think we should be working to minimize the safety net first and foremost. But then when you look at most analyses that look at the aggregate effects of immigration, whether it's legal or illegal, and illegal immigrants, by the way, are at a 10-year low in the country. It's been declining for a decade now and continues to look like it's going to be sloping downward. But they end up being a net benefit to the economy, both in terms of the amount of taxes they pay in over time versus what they take out, the amount of criminality, the amount of economic growth they bring. So that if we want to talk about economic effects, even people, economists who are hostile to more immigration, grant that immigration on net is an economic good. Then there were questions about cultural issues, which are, I think, a different kind of a topic that we could discuss.
Well, I also think, open borders is the same thing now as saying someone is pro-choice or pro-life, right? It's a shorthand that does a disservice to the subtleties of the debate. So when people say reason is open borders, it's the same thing as saying reason is pro-choice, which is to say, actually, virtually everyone at Reason has their own place where they draw and parse lines, and also, anyway, nobody is genuinely advocating a full-fledged, utopian version of open borders anywhere in our current functional political system, right? The thing you described sounds great to me, but it doesn't matter at all, because we are so far from that. We are a million miles from that. We are as long as the caravan marched from that. And while it's of course good to keep goals and long-term ideas in mind, what's actually on the table right now is, should we dramatically reduce legal immigration, which is what is currently happening,
right,
and also crack down on illegal immigration, explicitly using family ties as a lever,
and employer sanctions? Or
should we maybe at least not go backwards on this question, right? That's where Reason is actually
it's an odd thing though too, because 2 years into Trump's presidency, or a little bit less than that, support for immigration, according to public surveys and whatnot, are at all-time highs. So according to Gallup, 75% of Americans now agree with the statement, immigration is good for the country.
But it's
overall.
not because they all turn into libertarians. It's because they hate Donald Trump, right?
Yeah, that's probably a big part of it. 65% of self-identified Republicans, 85% of self-identified Democrats. But these are historic highs. And America, going back to the colonial period, had a vexed and ambivalent relationship towards immigration. But I think, most Americans agree that immigration is good. Most people dislike the idea of illegal immigration because of the illegal thing, and the way to fix that is by making it easier to come here legally.
Quick lightning round from Maggie over at Hit and Run, and Suderman. You can't take more than 1 minute to do this. What's everyone drinking?
Suderman gets 2 minutes.
This is easy. I'm drinking a Left Hand, which is a Boulevardier with mole bitters.
That's pretty quick. Nick?
Left hand, really?
I am drinking Perrier.
Also with his left hand.
Yeah.
I am drinking whatever bourbon was in Reason's booze cabinet. And yes, Reason has a booze cabinet. And yes, there's a lot of turnover.
And I'm drinking whatever white wine was in Reason's booze fridge, which usually is a bit dicey, but it's pretty good.
Yeah?
Pretty delicious.
It's meeting the Welch French wife standard.
Yes, it is. Another quick lightning round here, which maybe I'll start with. David Drenke, and I
definitely mispronounced that.
It sounds like I did, but it is pretty phonetic. I think history will judge me kindly. From YouTube.
Not if my last name is any indication.
That's got to be a misspelling.
Do you think David is going to judge you kindly?
That's not. It's really
not.
This
is like Ralph Benershka type of name. There's a missing vowel in here.
Oh my God, do I miss Ralph Benershka? Curious what everyone's born again moment was to libertarianism. The who, what, where, when, and how it happened. And in fact, I won't go first because Nick has a better story. Nick, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I don't have a particularly good story, but I started reading Reason in high school. My brother went to college and found it in the college bookstore and started sending it back to me. And so I started reading it, and I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Around the same time, I discovered Free to Choose by Milton and Rose Friedman, and I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense. And then it kind of went into a latency period, like a retrovirus. And when I went to grad school in the late 80s, at the beginning dawn of the age. Your immune system
was sufficiently compromised that it developed into full-blown libertarianism.
Pretty much. No, and it was the trigger. The HIV was political correctness. It was it was really in the late 80s was particularly after, and I've been thinking a lot about this, what happened, because the professoriate and the academy is much more left-wing than it used to be. I mean, it's always been kind of liberal or leaning to the left, but I think it was when Mike Dukakis lost to George H.W. Bush, people lost their shit in academies and universities, and they felt like for the first time that they were forever going to be the prisoner of a kind of Reagan America, and that's when they really got super politicized and things really became super ideological. And as a result of that, I started thinking about, okay, well, where am I on this? And that's where the libertarian, like a small L libertarian, classical liberal, 19th century, coming out of the 19th century and earlier, belief in kind of partial knowledge, pluralism, toleration, and whatnot. And it melded perfectly with the postmodernism, that I was actually kind of being inundated with in the academy at that point.
I told you people that Nick would have the best answer to this, and I was correct, although I don't want to sell short. Suderman, what's your...
There was no one moment, but there were a couple of first exposures, and the very, very first exposure was...
We need to let the disease metaphor go, you guys.
Why not? The disease model
let's
works
call it first
extremely
contact,
well.
all right? It was the first time,
Aliens.
the first
What
time
was
the
the
aliens,
pox blanket?
the libertarian
The smallpox
aliens
blanket?
landed in my life was when I was working at a Books A Million.
Oh, wow.
In Destin, Florida, and Books A Million had one of their selling points was that they had the best magazine rack, the best, and by best I mean the biggest and sort of biggest selection of magazines of any of the major chain bookstores in the country. And of course, you work at a place like this in the sort of winter, spring season when there's nothing big coming out, and you just have a lot of time to
You didn't have any customers.
I mean, it was
right, in
it
Florida,
was the
except for
beach,
bathroom?
right? Like the beach reads are a thing, and you still have bookstores at the beach, but they sell during
Do we? Still have bookstores at the beach?
Last time I checked, I mean, not
Which
literally
was when you
on
had
the
this
beach.
job at
So
yeah, it
what
might
was
have
the
been.
magazine?
Anyway, so
Was the
Recent
magazine
Magazine,
Reason?
and so I
Alright,
particularly noticed the "We Know Where You Live" issue
right,
that
2004.
that was sent to subscribers. Show with an image of their house on the cover, custom printed for them. And so that was sort of like point one. And then later I was reading, I became sort of more interested in kind of political journalism and opinion journalism. And I read a lot of conservatives basically arguing with libertarians, and ended up thinking that the libertarians were right. And also at that time spent a fair amount of time, this was when Wikipedia was relatively new, spent a fair amount of time just like reading through the kind of the chain of stuff that you encounter when you just Wikipedia libertarians. And so all of the kind of relevant thinkers, sort of who have influenced a lot of free market types on the right, broadly construed, sort of went through and sort of figured out what they were about, and then started actually reading their books. And it was, as I wrote, we all did our origin stories for the 50th issue, there was no moment where I changed. What happened was I realized that fundamentally this was who I was. And it wasn't a moment of like, oh, now I'm a libertarian, I wasn't before. It's, wait, that's what I've always been.
That's a bit like that for me too. Katherine?
Ayn Rand. The end.
It usually did begin, and it still
did. I was
does usually
15.
begin.
I read a bunch of Ayn Rand. I was raised by nice DC good government liberals who tried to save me for the good cause, and then they made a mistake. My mom gave me a copy of The Fountainhead.
Oh.
Which, yeah. Oh, yeah.
A lot of regrets there.
Yeah. So, for her, it was a book about architecture. And she thought it was a cool book about art and architecture. And I was like, this is my
Little
new life
did she
philosophy.
know.
And then there was a pretty rough summer there where I was probably not great to live with because everyone around
Ayn
me
Rand?
was like second-handers who should be treated badly or something. And then,
Were you calling your parents moochers and looters?
like my dog, like everyone.
That's just facts.
Although
Dogs are moochers and looters. I mean,
yeah.
that's their whole business
But-
model.
Why didn't the Fountainhead create more architects?
I think it did for a while.
Well, I mean, I actually do think the Fountainhead is partially responsible for the fact that in Hollywood, when they want someone to have a profession that's like cool and artistic, but not like, totally artsy fartsy,
So
like
this
it's
is like
always an
Mr.
architect.
Brady.
Yeah,
Mr. Brady and
exactly.
the Brady Bunch. was
Exactly.
was
So
an
I
architect.
actually do think that's traceable to Ayn Rand, if I had to guess. But
Yeah.
anyway, then I went to college and read some other books and discovered that there was maybe a broader term that I could apply to myself.
I am sort of more like Peter's story on some level. I was brought up as just anti-communism was in the air. My dad worked in the defense industry. My stepfather introduced me to Robert Heinlein, speaking of teenage books back in the day, which I thought was pretty cool because there's a lot of naked ladies and shooting stuff, and still not wrong about any of that. And I think I wrote my high school thesis paper was a mashup of how Robert Heinlein's Stranger to Strangeland influenced and was sometimes used as a blueprint of while predicting the Summer of Love in 1967, which then introduced.
Do you have a copy of that?
I do.
Can
It's
we
called The
publish
Martian and
it?
the Hippies.
Can we publish it?
It's not that good, sadly.
It's disappointing.
We did publish a version of that.
No.
Yeah, it was
Not by Matt.
of that thesis, not of your piece, but of the thesis that Heinlein is particularly fascinating because he spoke to both kind of like Cold War hawks and hippies.
And he made
measure.
a switch, because his early stuff is just shoot 'em up and super
what are
hardcore.
called as juveniles and stuff like Starship Troopers and whatnot, his young adult
Farnham's
novels.
Freehold or whatever the hell that was
Yeah.
called. And then suddenly it's Time Enough for Love, and
It's always time enough. There's always time enough for love.
I mean,
man. It's like
after,
Jell-O. There's
after a
always
certain
room
age,
for
there's
Jell-O.
not time for anything else.
Yeah.
Nick,
I think that was a hate crime.
It's early on in hate crimes, but then I lived in Eastern Europe for 8 years, drank Suderman, and then exposed me to seeing what post-communism was like, which was terrible, and came back to this country expecting that we had some kind of truth and reconciliation community commissions where Bill Kristol or William F. Buckley on one side and Ralph Nader on the other. Oh, that's a bad example, but would sit around and say, you know what, we shouldn't really have supported the Contras so much. Maybe we were wrong about South Africa. All this would have taken place while I was gone because I didn't know, because we didn't have the internet over there. And I came back and America was even more dumb than ever. And they're in the middle of the impeachments, as we called them, right then. That's when I came back. And so I looked around for, my God, is there anybody here who is sane talking about politics? And that's when I discovered both Virginia Postrell's in person. In her case, she sought me out and to buy me lunch, which is very nice because I didn't have any money. And then also Nick Gillespie's Reason, and thought, oh my God, this makes sense to me. So
when did you come back?
In 1998, in March. So we were in Cuba, Emmanuel was, my wife was in Cuba covering the Pope's historic visit to Cuba. And then the entire world's journalistic corps left 2/3 of the way through that trip because of Monica Lewinsky. And man, the Pope and Castro were just pissed.
Sure.
So what we've got here is Ayn Rand, Robert Heinlein, free speech, and the internet, basically.
Yeah.
All right.
That's also
That's the TLDR version of how you became a libertarian?
yeah.
Let's follow up on that from James Adams from YouTube. And just to remind everybody, we're here doing a webathon. As I mentioned at the top, we've got what, 36,000 donors, $36,000, 200 donors.
36,000 donors, but each of them only gave us $1.
You need to give us more dollars. No, I'd like to see more numbers. Those of you watching, if you're enjoying this, or even if you're doing it out of a sense of spite, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Please.
Matt loves numbers. It's a thing about it.
People love numbers, Peter.
Well, statistics, right?
Numbers are beautiful. Numbers are poetry.
Nine
every
reasons why
adjective
numbers are great.
You're not
Replace it
going
with
to
a
do
number.
like a Roger Angel box score thing.
This is a good segue to the next question.
He's all highfalutin.
It's got a number in it.
Does it? Which one? I was going to a different question. See, you made me now look at process. This is not where I was going to go with, but since she's the boss, Dean Love from Twitter. Yeah, that's your name. What does America feel like when our debt's carrying cost hit $1 trillion per year, Katherine?
It feels bad. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't feel great about it.
By carrying cost, he's talking about interest there, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
this is the money that it costs us to owe all the money we owe, which is
not
coming.
$1 trillion.
But it will be.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah, yeah.
coming, right?
Yeah.
Like these numbers accelerate so fast that sometimes these days I make, so every journalist fears making the million billion mistake
Right.
where you just mistype and it's like accidentally an order of magnitude off. But I now am making like the million trillion mistake sometimes. Like that's where we are in numbers about the government and how much freaking money it owes.
Yeah.
It's bad news. It feels
I
bad.
mean, the carrying cost alone is, I believe, either already or very, very nearly more than we are paying annually for Medicaid, which is one of the largest programs of social insurance programs of any kind in the country.
And the person who actually, I would say, so far has the best exploration of this is my gal novelist Lionel Shriver, who has written a novel about the life in Brooklyn when this particular apocalypse happens.
That's interesting. We have a lightning round having to do with hair. What's wrong with you people? What's right with you people? We'll start obviously with Nick here from Nikki Palazza. That's a shocker on YouTube. Nick, what is your secret for luscious hair?
Genetics.
Yeah, I think pretty much that's it. It's the only inheritance I got, along with a Tupperware mixing bowl that I don't know, did you guys grow up with vomit bowls? Like when you were sick, your parents would say,
we called ours a toilet.
Yeah. You can't take that to bed, like sometimes.
But you can sleep
So
in the
it's
Nick would go out to
hair.
the water closet.
It's the hair and the Tupperware vomit bowl.
This is from Delta 900 from YouTube. Tells Suderman the beard looks awesome. Did he join a shave club?
I did not join a shave club. I did try one of those like dollar razor situations a couple of years ago from the internet, and it was not good. The razors, they were very slippery in your hand, and I was like, "That I'm gonna kill myself."
Was that the razor though, or was it more of
I got to my late 30s, and I crossed the Rubicon past 35, and I was like, it needs to be different. The whole things need to be different.
What do you mean? Wait, are you talking about razor quality?
No, me.
No,
the
his
hair.
face.
The hair, me, the me.
okay.
I mean, it was getting different, but maybe not in the way that I wanted
It
it
was
to.
a pocket square situation, happened around the same time, would you say?
And he finally weaned himself off microwave pizzas right around the same time.
Well, there's
There
still
are
some
relapses.
in the way that President Obama quit smoking.
Yeah.
So not.
Katherine this is Brianna Enoch. I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name. From YouTube. Katherine's hair is amazing. Is a simple sentence. It's not a question.
Truth.
Not wrong.
Not genetics.
Not wrong. And anyone who criticizes
Although
purple
thanks
hair
to
on the internet,
CRISPR, right?
maybe.
Could you do
Oh,
that?
you're asking, is my hair currently
No.
produced
But
by CRISPR technology?
We could
But
have
yes.
genetically engineered purple-haired babies.
There are now.
in our lifetimes.
There were just now. We have, in theory, a pair of twins in China, Lulu and Nana, who are CRISPR babies, and I personally am looking forward to, as Ron Bailey says, having more kids when I'm older, who I will create using CRISPR, and they will have purple hair.
You just freaked me out. The question to me from FN Bob from Twitter: who cut Matt Welch's hair? That's an important question. So you don't want to go? It's a place called the Blue and Black, I believe. Not black, blue and black on Court Street in Brooklyn, and I recommend it. Not necessarily because of the cut, but because they serve you beer. And they play really good punk rock music.
Didn't you used to go to a place here that had it was some kind of asylee ran it or something like that? Diego's around the corner.
Oh, Diego's down the street. That's a Washington institution.
Oh, sorry,
Hello.
it's a Washington
That's
institution.
called
you
Diego.
guys.
St. Elizabeth's,
What's
yeah.
his face Plaza down there? I mean,
Okay.
they have the.
What's his face plaza?
Yeah, I mean, it's called that
It's
little
the street is named
after
after
him.
the
And they've
barber.
got 8x10s of every Supreme Court anti-justice in history. It's all phenomenal. Let's try to bait Nick more on immigration here. Gotfish YouTube for Nick. Nick, you had done a video on immigration and specifically border control. Concerning what happened over the Thanksgiving weekend, have your thoughts changed about immigration and border security?
No. And here, to me, the weirdest thing about the discourse about immigration is say you have a couple hundred people who are storming the border. And, it's true that there have been, in every year going back 10 years, there have been hundreds of kind of instances where border control actually does use pepper spray or has to restrain people from crossing the border. But I mean, for God's sake, if we can't handle a couple of hundred, migrants trying to flood the zone, what do we got going on? I think again, the larger question is do we want to process people in a way that is fair and equitable and makes sense? And we should be doing more of that. But I don't see the whole caravan stuff is a great example, I think, of where Donald Trump has been really good at kind of stoking anxiety about. I mean, it really is just kind of this cloud of dust. It's almost like the people who are chasing after Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. They're always way off in the horizon, and they're always kicking up, people like, my God, they're coming closer, and it's like, by the time they get here, it'll be a couple of hundred people down from a few thousand. We have 330 million people in the country. I think we can handle this.
Reason.com/Webathon. Go there, please donate. And on social medias, hashtag Webathon 2018 in case you are flinging rhetorical feces at us. Here is a question from Twitter. N for Mima, sorry, to Matt Welch. What low-hanging fruit / policy improvements do you all think are reasonable to expect to be implemented in the next 5 to 10 years? Reasonable to expect is loaded, but I would imagine the next 5 to 10 years we're going to see, even the next 5 to 10 days maybe, if things go in the right direction. We're going to see a continuation of what we've seen since Colorado and Washington in 2012, which is the dismantling of all the various pieces of the drug war. In fact, this morning, in its own way, there was looked like a dismantling of a little piece of the drug war in the Supreme Court oral arguments, right? They had an argument about civil asset forfeiture, which, what does that have to do with drugs? It has everything to do with drugs, like a lot of terrible things. Like when the Supreme Court started looking at and excusing these kinds of civil asset forfeiture is when the cops say, this computer was involved in a drug transaction. I'm going to take it, even though I'm not charging Katherine with a crime. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to auction it off or just steal it. Why are you turning away from me? I want to look.
No.
And I'm going to keep the money to fund my operations. It's like crazy. They're stealing from you. There's no other way around that. But in the beginning in the early 1970s,
and often you don't even have to be convicted.
You don't have to be charged. You don't have to be charged.
It's just because they think they sort of tag you as being involved in something.
Go back and look at the argumentation for doing that in the early 1970s. It was about two things. It was about the mafia, and it was about drugs, and it was also about the drug mafia. In the Supreme Court cases themselves, I believe it was William Rehnquist wrote the majority opinion in the relevant case, which I can't cite off the top of my head, in which he basically said, yeah, I know this looks really kind of crazy, what with the whole Fourth Amendment and anything, but troubled times called for troubled solutions. It's terrible. So it's all...
I feel super confident that Rehnquist
that's
did not
direct. That's a cite.
Write that sentence.
Look in the Volk conspiracy. It's I'm just block quoting myself here. But no, it was all about drugs. And so we're going to see lots of little things like this. Today, just in case no one knows what I'm talking about, there was a civil asset forfeiture case involving the state of Indiana doing some terrible thing. And Neil Gorsuch said to the Solicitor General, I believe, of Indiana, again, this is a paraphrase.
Direct quote, super direct quote.
Like, bro, are you even kidding me? What are you talking about? What are you thinking about?
That seems more like a Kavanaugh line.
Oh. Too soon.
God, so good. So yes, we're going to see a lot more of this. We're going to see more states legalize. We finally got illegal marijuana on the shop on the East Coast. I never thought I'd see that happen. Terrible coast on the East. And there's so much of in Florida of all places. On election day, they re-enfranchised ex-felons who for decades have not been allowed to vote. These are all tiny little bits of the drug war. Next 5 to 10 years, I think that's going to be the biggest thing. But are there other things in the next 5 to 10 years that you would either expect or think that if we sort of push, maybe the wall will come?
This is a small one, but I think it's significant and ties into something we were talking about before. I think over-the-counter birth control is coming. I think that's literally December 1968, like one of the very, very first issues of Reason cover story is about birth control. So I recognize that it's a little crazy to be like, we're going to solve this now, guys. But some other stuff came true from those issues, so you never know. And I think that the combination of a Republican in power who is encroaching on Obamacare's mandate to provide birth control, who is allowing more and more exemptions to that, which I think is a good thing, and the realization that Plan B, the emergency contraception being over the counter, has not in fact resulted in just women's bodies scattered all over the ground with their ovaries dangling out. It's going to be fine. Everyone's recognizing it's going to be fine. And even though we are generally not moving in the direction of giving people more control over their bodies and their own health information, I do think birth control could be liberated in some forms from the pharmacist. That's my take.
Suderman, what, 5, 10
Well, I mean,
years?
what could reasonably expect? Could reasonably expect
see.
could mean
already-
could mean
Well,
like
what are
this is
low-hanging
totally
fruit?
reasonable and we should expect it. And then there's
Is it reasonable
like
to expect
likely
it?
to happen. So like I cover mostly federal policy. The federal level, like nothing good is actually
Oh, no.
likely.
That's so sad.
However, it is completely
net neutrality,
reasonable.
dude. You wrote about net neutrality
It
6
is-
years ago, and it was repealed.
Okay,
is that
so
a good thing?
I'm thinking of Congress here, but at the federal level, it is completely reasonable to expect Congress to return to normal order when it comes to the budgeting process. They should do it. They have not been doing it for basically 20 years now. It has been breaking down since I want to say the last time they passed all of the appropriations bills correctly according to Hoyle, like by September, and had the whole shebang put together was like right before you came back to the United
Yeah,
States.
it
I
was
believe it was
96,
97.
And then there was a complete a near complete breakdown under Obama.
Yeah, I mean, it got worse under
2010,
George Bush,
2011, yeah.
and it was much worse then. It totally broke down under Obama, and there's not really any sign that it's going to come back. You have a couple of senators who sort of gripe about it every now and then, but it could and it should. It wouldn't be that hard, and we wouldn't end up in these dumb situations like literally we are in now, in which it looks quite possible. I don't want to say it's likely, but it certainly looks possible that the combination of Democratic anti-Trumpers and Senate GOP muckety-mucks and Donald Trump could end up shutting down the government on December 7th because they can't agree to give Trump the $5 billion he wants to build his stupid border wall, which was supposed to be paid for by Mexico
Mexicans.
That
anyway.
was Mexicans.
Nick, what Mexicans
school
do?
choice. I think universal school choice in the sense that parents or the idea that you should go to schools that you are assigned to is breaking down rapidly. And as in many other parts of our lives where we do have more autonomy and choice, I think the logic of just saying, you know what, let's have schools, public schools, charter schools mostly, kind of compete for students and have people sign up. I think that's accelerating, and it, within 5 to 10 years, I think that's low-hanging fruit. That'll have a massive change on the way that people get educated, and it'll particularly help the lower-income people.
All right, Reason.com, Webathon, hello, hi, go. So more questions here. Let's throw this to Katherine as the current brand manager here. Joe Clave from Hit and Run. Do you see it as a victory when Republican pundits and politicians, well, I just got to be Republican, dude, pundits and politicians self-identify as libertarian or libertarian on issue X, or is it a watering down / bastardization of libertarianism?
Yeah, I don't know. I used to always say, like, anybody who wants to label, like, you do it, come on in, like, the tent is huge, let's hang out at the party together. The rise of the alt-right out of the ranks of people who identified, many of them as libertarians, has made me rethink that somewhat. This question is about sort of mainstream Republican types who identify as libertarian. That I generally like, because I think lots of people describe themselves as Republicans, and in fact even Reason staffers, just because they didn't have another word. And if we can give them another word that's like Republican but better, then yes, they're welcome to it.
All right. Stephen Karen from YouTube. What is the libertarian position on the public notification of sex offenders? What is your personal opinion about the public notification of sex offenders? Peter, you're from Florida.
I mean, we've done a bunch of stories on
that's
this.
like an opt-out, right? On your birth certificate, you're put on a sex registry.
I mean, yeah,
Cass Sunstein's next book, I think.
Florida man may
Pudge.
have some additional connotations attached to it, and not even when you're naked in a Waffle House, perhaps like strangling a chicken at 2 in the morning.
Euphemisms.
Nope.
Look, so the problem with sex offender registries is that they are often far too broad in who they cover. They often end up keeping people who in some cases have done something that is really wrong, but keeping people who have done at most in some cases just one thing that was quite wrong, and who have otherwise sort of paid for their crime, end up keeping those people out of a lot of communities, and unable in some cases just to live anywhere in cities. And this, I think, this is a hard thing to sell to, say, parents, in nice school districts, in nice suburban communities. But people who have done one thing wrong and who have changed and who are not likely to be, who've shown no signs that they are going to be repeat offenders, those people deserve a chance to live normal lives. And this is just not a popular message. Like, people just don't want to be around them.
Well, and it's also, I mean, the fact is that the recidivism rate of sex offenders as a group is not higher than it is for other criminals.
That was like a myth that was perpetuated
that has been
for
decades,
years.
For decades. And, the idea of a sex offender registry, that these crimes are so particularly awful. And then a lot of the times they turn out to be cases where it might be a 17-year-old with a 15-year-old in a consensual relationship that dogs people for a long time. I think it's wrong. And it's also, you don't have to have sympathy for sex offenders to recognize the idea when the government or when the state at whatever level starts creating permanent registries that they make public. This is not a good thing, and we are in many ways. I think we're moving out of a phase where people are done with building more prisons and putting more people in jail. We're not done with the idea of surveilling more people and having people walk among us, but then subject to all sorts of different laws and things like that. And I think it's worth, I think sex offender registries are wrong for all of the reasons that Peter talked about, plus the fact that there's no indication that they actually protect the public. So, I mean, it's a useless added cost that creates more of a surveillance.
They weren't intended to protect the public. They were entirely a political scare tactic.
Yeah, well, part of it is the idea of, like, when you buy a house, the realtor or the mortgage company will say at some point, like, here's the sex offender registry, go check out just to make sure. We're not going to do it for you, et cetera. So, I mean, there is... there's the notion behind it,
announced and campaigned on as a sort of way of playing to a certain type of suburban, safe school district voter who it's very actually somewhat similar to the way that Donald Trump talks about immigrants, right? It's not exactly the same, but there's a related kind of it was a political
very different
scare
kind
tactic.
of caravan, but yeah.
Yikes. We have a comment here from Jay Wall at Hit and Run saying, I've listened to the podcast for a couple of years. You're doing this at Hit and Run, Jay Wall? But this is the first time I've seen what you all look like. Because the pictures are really hard to find there at Reason.com.
Why are you gonna be mean
I
to our
know,
nice commenter?
because it's fun. That's why we all like each other. And I'm amazed to say that you are largely how I imagined you look. I know you didn't mean that as a compliment, but thank you, because it could have been a lot worse.
We're all on our own brand.
We're all on our own brand day after day. That's just a reminder to everyone. You can subscribe to said podcast and listen with your ear holes over there on Apple Podcasts.
And imagine how we look. You can spend that whole podcast
just imagineering Suderman as a Disney character in the Hall of Presidents, but also a Spotify.
Wait! I'm Pirates of the Caribbean. It's a small. I mean, yeah.
I don't want to.
I'm making my black rum and dipping my hair in it.
Have you been to the Pirates of the Caribbean ride since they cleaned it up? Because
by putting Johnny Depp in it?
No, but the ride at Disney World and Disneyland, they got rid of the pillaging and all of that, didn't they?
I have not been since like 1995, 1993.
That's fine. We're anti-pillaging.
Like okay.
I look forward to the next
bad.
Robert Bly book about how we're losing innocence here. We've got a trifecta about climate change. I'm actually going to throw it out in a libertarian sense to the panel here. 3 questions. They can each take whatever one they want. Andy Favor says, why the blind support for the climate change narrative? Gareth Cox says, what are some libertarian climate change policies? And Brent Cordner says, how will markets solve global warming? Who wants what piece? Go.
That's so good. That's the whole spectrum of questions, actually. That's kind of great. The answer here and always is Ron Bailey. Ron Bailey is the answer to why are we so credulous of this so-called climate change, because Ron Bailey reads graphs for fun. He eats statistics for breakfast, and he says it's real. And I, for one, trust Ron Bailey in a way that I trust virtually no one else, certainly not the people at this table. And Ron Bailey also has some excellent answers for questions 2 and 3. He is a supporter of carbon taxes as the least bad thing that might happen, that people might actually go for. It is the least inefficient way to price in some of the negative externalities of human-produced greenhouse gases. Also, though, there's all kinds of cool technology out there that might work to reduce global warming without actually just making everybody sit at home in the dark without even a candle, because that's what environmentalists want us to do.
I'll take a swing at the idea of like, how will free markets solve or stop climate change? They won't, but what they will do is they'll make us more resilient and able to live with it. The fact is there is climate change. I agree with Katherine, and Ron is my guru on all of this stuff. I don't doubt that there's, climate change, increased temperatures, all of that kind of variability of weather with the possibility of a catastrophic event. But the real thing is not how do you stop civilization and go back to some level that may or may not have any effect on it. It's like, how do you live with it? And you do that by getting richer.
And I would also point out that there's this thing called the Kuznetsov curve, which is originally observed outside the field of environmental science, but it's the notion that as certain societies, or as all societies actually, that's the point, it's a curve, get richer, they get cleaner in a way that is not widely observed even at the time in the places that they're getting cleaner, because people are kind of hardwired to believe that everything's getting worse. And in fact, we're decarboning a little bit in this country. I mean, we are down to what, 1990 levels now of greenhouse gas output in this country. People don't want to hear that, and a lot of the people who are most alarmed about climate change are the ones who are least happy to hear that the biggest single reason for that, especially over the last 5 years, is the replacement of coal factories with hydraulic fracturing. And natural gas, because they're against hydraulic fracturing for its own particular reasons. But there was Noah Rothman was on Morning Joe, I think, a couple of days ago, and just got a ton of heat. And I saw on my Twitter feed, because he said basically the same things that I think are true. One is that most recent projections for how things are going to get worse over the next 5 to 10 years have all overshot how things actually have gone, even though we are warmer every single year. That's true. And the other thing that he said was basically what I just said, which is that getting richer helps you mitigate not just the effects, but the problem itself. These are not non-answers. These are actual answers. And when you want to talk about, okay, what are you willing to trade? Are you willing to trade a point of economic growth per year, per century, for what? For your regulation, we start actually talking to people about what the trade-off they're willing to have. That's a real conversation. It's not a fake one. Peter,
in terms of, policy responses, I like Ron Bailey favor a clean carbon tax. One of the biggest problem with a carbon tax. But with a simple, straightforward kind of not a lot of exceptions built in. This is the big problem with all of the carbon tax proposals, is that they always get larded up with kind of like carve-outs and non-standard exceptions to instead of just saying no,
we against the carbon tax,
and those and eventually you get those.
I think everybody should be against a carbon tax. It becomes
but here's the thing. But
sink.
But here's the thing about a carbon tax. We should tax things that are bad. And we should not tax other things. And so you can do a swap with the payroll tax that is revenue neutral, so it doesn't grow the size of government. And what it does is it disincentivizes bad behavior and lets you take more money home in your paycheck.
Whenever I hear you sing this song, I want to sing along, but it's like the level of not going to happen is so deep there. Like, oh, I know, we'll just be revenue neutral. It would have totally fair carbon. Like, I'm with you.
I didn't say Congress was going to pass this.
Yeah.
I said this was what I would favor. And in fact, I explicitly mentioned the carve-outs because the further away you get from a straightforward clean carbon tax, the less effective and worthwhile a policy
what
was.
is
I want
that,
to tell
though?
Claire Mullen what to make for dinner.
But is it just, can I ask, with the whole idea behind the carbon tax is that we can quantify the amount of externality that a cubic ton or whatever of carbon causes, and so we tax it at that rate to discourage it.
You just guess. I mean, you're just making a
Yeah,
guess,
I know, but
right?
then it's like, why, and so you're trying to reduce the amount of carbon that's being used, but then that money just goes to whatever the government is going to pay.
Well,
Well,
that's why,
anyway.
that's
some-
why
in
we
some
want
cases-
to take the
this
money
is
away
why
from
it's
Depends on how
complete
these things end up
horseshit.
getting structured.
And it's just
So this
like,
is why there's another policy that I'm-
let innovation go, and
There's another
you know,
policy
you'll
that I
get
actually
past
think is pretty
carbon.
interesting, which is
Just wanna yell
basically
at each other
say
for a while.
we take no action at all, except we impose a small sort of growth fee on the economy that says that a small percentage of our growth over the next 100 years, we're going to take that money and we're going to put it towards specifically, like, we're going to pay people to try and figure out what to do. And so we say, like, let's let the economy grow as fast as it can, and we will just devote a small percentage of the growth to paying
Growth-
people. And like,
growth fee
and so
reminds
it's
me
a
of,
pro-growth.
windfall
This
profits
basically
tax.
says,
Yeah.
basically.
Those are good.
Yeah.
And
Bring
I
that
don't,
back.
again, you can see that policy going wrong, but it also wouldn't be catastrophic and wouldn't be too expensive.
I can
and is
only
like,
see
sort of
that
starts from, I
policy
think, some of the right premises.
going wrong. I'm just going to ask this question because we've just demonstrated an answer to it, unless it's been removed since the last time that I was looking here. We know what you all, this is from Chris Card at YouTube. We know what you all at Reason generally agree on. What do you generally disagree on? We
There it
disagree
is.
on carbon tax.
How to solve global warming.
We disagree, and this was an earlier
Statistics,
question
numbers.
that we didn't ask, but taxation is theft. She's yes, Nick is no. What else do we disagree on?
I think there's some
Peter is
disagreement
just
on,
that are bad.
squid.
on
He's
Isaac
squishier than I
Asimov
am.
versus Robert
How did that
Heinlein.
happen?
Ooh, that's true. Should we take
right.
a
Yeah.
vote?
I mean, so
Jesus
like
Christ.
I like both of
Heinlein
them,
versus Asimov.
but
The
like I have a
only
clear
thing that
favorite.
Asimov has over Heinlein are sideburns.
Let's vote.
He's
Which is
terrible
important.
on every
Asimov.
other level. Ugh,
Heinlein.
It's a
There
generational
you go.
divide.
yeah, even though weren't they basically
It's a
the
war on
same
war.
age?
Let's keep going. Brian Brady from Email, that 20th century technology, says, what's a reduce, not reform government guy to do? The Libertarian Party is so ideologically pure, is it, Brian, that it can't get elected. Well, elected Republicans are increasingly crony capitalists, and elected Democrats are becoming Stalinists. I think you might be engaging in some hyperbole, Brian, but you pose some interesting
We do not do
questions.
that here.
No.
Never.
Never.
Yeah.
That's not hyperbole itself. I think Justin Amash, pretty much one of the only good members of Congress, had a tweet just today about basically the same thing. Like
It's a legit question though. Like
Yes.
what are you gonna do when we want to try and make a little less
my
government?
answer to you is go read your Hayek so you can tell me what's in it. But also that there is no one true way, man. I mean, there's you can
What are you talking about?
no, there is no one true way.
Nick,
of what-
Nick knows the one true way,
No,
and he's
no,
about
I'm
to
not
tell
saying
us.
that. What you,
Lay it on
what
us,
you gotta
buddy.
you gotta keep on keeping on, and you fight for a reduction in the size, scope, and spending of government. That's all.
Right, but he's
That's
talking
what
about.
he's
He's like,
saying.
what does he do
No,
with
he's
his
talking
vote?
about. He's talking
What
about
does
his
he
Yeah,
do
vote.
with
you
this?
vote. You vote for people who say that they're going to reduce the size, scope, and
Move to
spending of
Michigan.
government.
Vote for Justin Amash.
And
I'm
drink
just saying, but you
Founder's
make-
beer because it's made in Justin Amash's
I just
district.
I think the answer here is seasteading. Just want to throw that out there.
that's you drink. Get that off. I'm sure there's a crypto question or blockchain question.
Seriously,
lurking
I mean, I do
just below.
think-
But there's so many different ways of political engagement. What we were talking about earlier today about Neil Gorsuch. Okay, there's a small libertarian win. Where did that come from? That came from a 30, 40 year process of the libertarian legal movement going from this big to a much bigger to a genuinely competitive element within the broader kind of center-right tent out there, as Damon Root has written so wonderfully about, including in his book Overruled. So that's one way that you effect social change that has kind of nothing to do on some level with who won last election, depending on whatever. There's just so many different ways to go about it that I think we tend to way overthink or prioritize our approach towards what we should vote for in an election, what party we should root for, or whatever. There's other ways to
We
do
think of these things as 2 and 4 year cycles because that's when we vote, and that's totally understandable. But real policy change takes decades, and you can look at good and bad policy changes that have happened basically, certainly in my lifetime. I was born in 1981, and the big policy movements on healthcare, in particular, is the one I know. But as you mentioned, sort of the kind of rise of the conservative and libertarian legal movement, the Federalist Society. All of these things are movements and ideas that took decades to develop and to become to come to fruition and to matter. And there were points along all of these along the timeline where all of those kind of looked like failures. Like they might not work, like they were just going to get overtaken by whatever stupid thing was on the front page of the news or CNN that day. But because people stuck with it and sort of believed in the long game. And so this, to me, if you want to make real big, a big long-term impact in politics, you have to play a long game, and you have to assume that you are going to look like you are failing a lot of the way along the way until you get there.
This is also true of many libertarians. You're going to look like a failure for a while.
Yes,
and then every now and then, like, I don't know, it turns out Bitcoin made money or
Right.
what else.
No,
Yeah,
but that's the
there's
other
a
thing
future in magic after all.
That's the other part of it is that if you're a libertarian, you not only can, but you should believe that a lot of political change comes from unexpected places that are not in politics. And you can look at Bitcoin, or you can, if Elon Musk, I will say that I am skeptical that this happens, but if Elon Musk sends a bunch of people to Mars, that will not be primarily because somebody in Congress, or even because an activist group here, the Send Americans to Mars PAC, decided that's what we should do.
Jerome Corsi's next grift until he got indicted.
Nick, wasn't there a book about how to affect political change outside this?
Yeah, I think so.
Let's go lightning round quick here. Katherine, Claire Mullen from Facebook, our friend Claire, asks, what should I make for dinner tonight?
Good, excellent question. My answer for you is kangaroo.
Oh.
An underrated meat, super delicious. They're basically pests, so it's, if anything, a virtue to kill them. Marinate it with something acidic and then serve it with some fig. Delicious.
And Scott, you should start your dinner with a mezcal Negroni.
Yes. Scott Miller from Facebook asks a pointed question to Peter. Tax things that are bad? Who makes that decision?
I mean,
you got to say, if we're going to tax anything, which we shouldn't, because taxation is theft.
We have to have a government. And that government.
Do we though?
So to go back to what we disagree on, Peter's the libertarian who thinks that maybe we have to have a government. And let's forget that. I'm not even sure I have opinion about whether we have to have one. We do. And we are going to.
We can agree on that.
And so since we have a government, and since we would rather it not just kind of collapse tomorrow, or at least I would rather it not just sort of collapse into chaos tomorrow. Like, if we're going to shut it down, it should be orderly and planned, which,
just like we are currently running the government.
That order.
And so, so the government is going to decide this, but we get to elect the government and we get to influence them. And in fact, taxes are one place where voters have a huge amount of influence and American voters have been quite successful at limiting tax hikes. In some ways, not limiting spending increases, but American voters have been quite successful relative to their European Democratic counterparts at limiting tax hikes. And so it's a place where voters have a lot of influence.
Taxes should be recognized first and fully as the revenue necessary to pay for government. They should not be. And this is one of the reasons I'm against a carbon tax is for the same reason I'm against a tobacco tax. And, I realize there are externalities, but it's like, no, taxes should be value-free as much as possible, and they should be based on consumption rather than on income or anything else.
Well, a carbon tax does end up taxing consumption to some extent.
No, that's true. It is
and
a consumption.
And I think all of us, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Katherine is so against taxes that she wouldn't prefer better taxes.
I would prefer better taxes.
But all of us would agree on the consumption part, which is
Right.
that we should probably we should either radically lower or not have an income tax at all, and we should be taxing consumption. We should probably do things through a value-added tax, which is harder to cheat, is a better, is just a pure consumption
Donate
tax.
to Reason, where we're going to advocate for carbon taxes and the VAT.
I feel like things got off the rails here.
Holy crap.
Give us some more
better
lightning.
taxes.
Better taxes
Lower
are better.
taxes.
I think we have the
Lower
ability to
spending.
cut his mic.
I want more
Reasons
lightning round
Webathon,
questions.
More lightning round questions here. Nick Gillespie, JS Economics from YouTube. Julian Assange, friend or foe of freedom?
I think Julian Assange to date has been very good for freedom.
Ooh.
I think that
Controversial.
I think that WikiLeaks has been a force for good by exposing horrible government actions. And I think it continues to be that. I don't care. I don't know anything about Julian Assange as a person, nor do I care to. I'm thinking that his little cubbyhole at the Ecuadorian embassy probably smells worse than like any college senior's dorm room ever could. But WikiLeaks has been great for forced transparency, and more power to them. And just very quickly, the idea that Assange or WikiLeaks is doing Russia's bidding by exposing bad things that the American government or actors in the American government has done, there might be some plausibility or some truth to that. I don't care, because what I want to know about is what my government is doing and when it's doing bad things. And one other thing is that some of the stuff that WikiLeaks released at various points, it showed diplomatic communications among America where we were actually we were saying the same thing in private and in public in our diplomacy in a way that many other countries weren't. WikiLeaks has been a very, very important and powerful force for good.
Sean Andrew from YouTube asks, new media enables more and more niche celebrities. Can the team comment on this phenomenon? It depends on if I still get scrolled down by our staff here, and their own celebritarian status and the weirdness this begets. I'll answer this instead of a team. But the word celebritarian is not a thing. It's not a thing. It's a word that people use. The thing that it describes is not a thing.
That's good enough.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Kyle Lolo from Facebook. Thoughts on the cryptocurrency market's current slide, crypto's long-term impact on our society, and how close the crypto anarchist strain of crypto fits with libertarian ideals. Katherine, why don't you take that since you're the anarchist of the group?
I am optimistic about blockchain, though not super optimistic about cryptocurrency as currency in the immediate future. It fits wonderfully with all of the anarchism that we got hanging around here, and in fact is probably the most exciting development in anarchism in my lifetime, as if that's a sentence anyone cares about. Yeah, that's my answer. I think the idea of distributed ledgers is impossible to explain, and Matt Welch still doesn't understand them, but that it will be one of these things like the internet where people don't have to understand it when it just worms its way into their lives and governs everything they do in a way that is less controllable by the state. We will all be better off.
I think the crypto philosophy is great. And there was actually a pretty good New Yorker feature on some of the guys who were involved in this and sort of explaining that they, this ran maybe a month or two, and kind of laying out a case that for these folks, some of them have become exceptionally well off because of Bitcoin, but they're not really... It's not just about the money, and in some cases maybe not even primarily about the money. It's about the idea, which is to create a system where two people who don't know each other, or 1,000 people who don't know each other, can have a transaction between them that they and everyone else involved, everyone else in the world who is involved in the system, can trust, and that you can do it without the government or without any centralized overseer. And that is an incredibly powerful idea that Bitcoin is making happen all the time. And I think that idea is I actually think that idea really will change the world over the next decades.
Can I say also really fast, one great thing about Bitcoin is that since it is totally distributed, there's no one person in charge of it who can screw it up for everyone else by being a douchebag, which I think lots of exciting technological developments have the douchebag in charge problem. Maybe even Reason Magazine might have the douchebag in charge problem. But
we don't think of it as a problem.
I'm in charge. It was about me.
We don't think of it as a problem. Yeah, and there's nobody that Congress can call.
Blockchains do not have a douchebag in charge, and they don't have anything that anyone can boycott or call and complain or whatever, and that is sorely needed.
Okay, Rob Shimens has a question from Facebook. I will direct this one towards Nicholas Gillespie. I support the legalization of marijuana, he writes, although I do too. I also oppose federal marijuana laws, but I also defended Jeff Sessions when he said he would enforce those federal laws. I do not think it is in our best interest to have elected officials enforcing only those laws they agree with. What is your view of the concept of rule of law, Nick?
Rob Shimmons, who runs Stossel in the Classroom. He's a friend and an ally in many aspects. I agree you don't want elected officials who only enforce the laws they believe in. By the same token, when drug laws or when laws are bad, they should not be followed. And people should be kicked out of office if enough people agree with them.
You also have to prioritize. The federal government only has so many cops. They don't have enough people to enforce the recreational use of marijuana. They just don't. There's not. You got a body count problem, and so you can ask the federal government to have prioritization issues with it, regardless of rule of law.
But this is also to Matt. I'll cite one of our shared favorite authors, Bill James, who was talking about whether or not it's legal to block the plate by catchers or other fielders in baseball. You shouldn't. It's also true. You shouldn't have laws that do not actually carry either the popular will or should be laws in the first place, and we should be trying to get rid of
that
those
don't
on the
reflect
books.
reality. Yeah. Bien from YouTube. People, just like make it phonetic or invent a new one. How to win a fight with a Bernie Sanders supporter? Do I just walk away?
Just be nice. Be a nice person. You're not going to win on the merits. Nobody wins fights by giving an argument that changes someone's mind in the moment. What you want to do is show that you're a person of goodwill and that you believe they are people of goodwill. And then you want to just like incept whatever idea you think they're the most vulnerable to. And then you just want to be like, change the subject, walk away. I really believe that. I really believe in-person conversation. That is the only way to go. Like, no one has ever browbeaten anyone into submission in a conversation and had them stop being a Bernie Sanders supporter and become a libertarian.
I agree. And also, one of the first things is to establish, like, what are you arguing about? Are you arguing about ends versus means?
But you should definitely not do that by saying, we need to define some terms.
Yeah, no, quite
because
true.
Because then you already have lost.
But I find this is true of a lot of conservatives as well as progressives or whatever, where they're angry about something, but then, like, is it a question of, like, are we trying to help the poor? Are we trying to make the environment cleaner? Are we trying to give more options?
That's my, like,
and then be like, are we arguing about ends or are we arguing about means? And in some cases, like, you get pretty quickly where it's like, no, I don't think people should have these choices. To live this way or to do this or to do that,
and that's when you're like, money. How's about those Bill Jameses and the baseballs?
Yeah.
That's good.
Was that good? Did I do good?
Very
good attempt. Question for Peter. David Burns from YouTube. See that good phonetic name, Dave, even if it's not your name.
This seems,
right?
frankly, like maybe generationist and also like racist. You only want white dude names, old white dude names?
Dave doesn't see color.
That's again, it's just my own name.
This
baggage.
Pardon. This question may be best suited for Peter because certain people at this table will not understand what language you're speaking. But what are your thoughts on the FTC investigating the use of loot boxes in video games?
My thoughts are that loot boxes are terrible and the FTC shouldn't worry about them at all. The FTC has many, 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 many other things to investigate.
So you don't
and in
think,
fact,
though,
like, fraud is like a legitimate area for the government to be like focused on. And prevent, but loot boxes aren't fraud. They advertise that it is a system. So basically, within video games,
you've triggered him.
Within video games, there are randomized rewards, and it's like a slot machine. And so sometimes, right, in the way that when you sit at a slot machine and drop in your nickels or your quarters or your dollars or whatever, and you pull, and it's just totally randomized based on an algorithm. It's not that you just play until you accidentally win, and that's what video games now do in many cases. But what I would say is that if you look at the last year, there has been a huge player revolt against loot boxes. Players are saying these games suck.
I know exactly.
We don't want to play these games. We are not going to buy them. And in several cases, the developers have actually backed down, either removing or limiting how loot boxes affect the play. And so the FTC doesn't need to, because you know what? Gamers themselves figured out how to get game developers to stop making loot boxes that are terrible and ruin your games.
Loot box.
This question from Ed Moser from YouTube. I'll take it to Nick because it's fun. This is one of those potential Aleppo question if it works out well. Name 5 countries you'd withdraw U.S. troops from. Go.
5 countries?
5. Oh, see, he's already.
He's filibustering.
There are that many?
No, but I mean, first off, I would start with Korea, Syria, Iraq, Iran. Well, not Iran, but bases in Saudi Arabia, Canada.
U.S. out of Canada.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know. Am I up to 5 yet?
I think it's pretty close.
Germany.
Yeah.
Do we need the medical facilities in Germany to support
Germany and Japan?
Can I get my
all
answer?
Of the wars that we're conducting
the
in the Middle
United
East.
States border zone.
Nice.
There you go.
I'll have you know
Libertarian.
that when I wrote the weather box at the UC Santa Barbara Daily Nexus newspaper, we would put a little slogan underneath the staff box that would change every day, and it was supposed to be comical. This is a Cold War era joke, Nick. I put at the bottom as a slogan one day, U.S. out of Nebraska. Yeah. And then that's still funny. You
are living the dad joke life right now.
It is.
Yeah.
You really are.
It's the only way to do it. Speaking of which, if you haven't rewatched the Libertarian Dad Jokes video from ReasonTV from the Bragg brothers and Andrew Heaton.
Hey, Matt, do making videos like that, does that cost money?
That costs money. It costs a lot of money for Andrew Heaton to stand in front of a green screen and say really funny things. By which I mean super funny. And that's what we're here. We're doing Webathon here. We started this broadcast a good 75 minutes ago, a very good 75 minutes ago, when we had 200 donors and 36,000.
If we're being honest, so it feels longer.
Yeah. It does. So go to reason.com/webathon. Get in there. There's all kinds of giving levels. You get swag. You get stuff. You get to we have a scroll at the top of the reason.com, the hit and run page that says this gift comes from, Fist of Etiquette. Just throw a name out there.
Just
random.
hypothetically.
And then they have a little space to talk smack too, right?
You can say what name.
You can say what name that you want associated with it. So let's start asking the important questions. This one from Dr. Armageddon at Twitter. Aside from hashtag or at Matt Welch, do any of you play a musical instrument? And he goes ahead and imagineers this one. I can imagine Mangu-Ward playing the piccolo. And Peter Suderman playing the keyboard.
Okay, so I did play the piccolo.
Yes.
So congratulations to you, sir or ma'am.
Did you play with a big band hat on?
Yep. I sure did. I played the flute and the piccolo, and I was the drum major of my high school marching band. So that's everything you need to know about me right there. But Peter's answer to this is even better than mine. But before he answers, I do just want to say, we have discussed here in the office, we could do we could field a pretty decent pep band. Like if anybody has any like sporting events.
Cantina band.
It'd be like exactly the Star Wars Cantina band.
Girl.
Yeah. Go ahead, Peter. What did you play?
So I played the sousaphone for
he
7
did.
years. Sousaphone and tuba. Also played a little bit of flute, an awful lot of guitar and bass. And I was
in what kind of band?
Well, wait. That's several different kinds of bands.
I just want you to say that you're in a ska band.
I was never in a ska band.
I was
never once in a ska band with any instruments. I was
That sounded like a technicality, the way you said it.
I was never in a ska band, period.
Really?
Of any kind.
I feel like you were.
I knew people in ska bands. I went to their shows. But no, I was never in a ska band. I played the tuba and the sousaphone.
How do you get into? How are you like? I want to play the sousaphone.
So I can tell you exactly. Is you go
magazine?
to the Ruckle Middle School band room
instrument fair
over the summer between 5th and 6th grade when you're about to enter middle school when the band program is about to start, and you go there during one of the several open house days, and they just basically shove a bunch of instruments up to you.
So you're like the Dalai Lama.
You kind of try them and one of them feels right. And you just know it,
Look how
right?
happy he is.
Super happy. I'm thinking about the
Well,
sousaphone.
no, but the sousaphone is great because the sousaphone dots the I in Script, Ohio, in the Ohio State Marching Band.
No, that's of the marching.
That's like
of the collegiate marching band instruments. That is the most
of course you want to play the
piccolo.
sousaphone.
It's
I
mean the
maybe the triangle.
The sousaphones and the drums are sort of the backbone of the marching band. I actually did not like marching season. I really much preferred concert season.
I just like that we're not even thinking about Nick Gillespie answering this question.
I have no musical ability. Yeah.
Matt, you should tell us about your.
It's not interesting. So how James Adams
Actually, your musical instrument it is a little relevant because you were a busker, right?
Sure. So I played.
Now you're being a busker again.
Opted out
for
of talking about it, so why don't you continue?
Continue opting out.
Carry on.
We have a guitar that I could bring you right now.
So James Adams from YouTube says, if you had to choose one libertarian book to convince non-libertarians, what would it be? I'll answer first. Man, I'm not about convincing other people. Katherine, you go.
What? That's a terrible answer.
You work for an opinion magazine.
It's weird, isn't it?
Suddenly
I
a lot
hate
becomes
to
clear.
be a broken record, but like I still think it's the Fountainhead. Man.
Really?
Yeah. Like, well, are we talking about a teenager or a grown ass person?
That's,
Because teenager, we're definitely anything in the sort of utopian, world breaking science fiction zone is gonna be good. Like your Heinleins, your Rands, whatever. For grown-ups, though, I actually would go with my other cliche answer here, which is some Steven Pinker.
I actually will answer the question because if I think about it, this has worked over even despite a lack of intention on some levels. But I've recommended to many people Kindly Inquisitors by Jonathan Rauch, the great free speech book from 20 years ago.
But these are neither Pinker nor Rauch are hardcore libertarian.
Correct.
Well, right, because you don't.
I mean, like,
you
what
gotta
You're
be
trying to convince people who are really not libertarians.
If I'm trying to convince a non-libertarian...
What was the question, though?
The question is, if you had to choose one libertarian book to convince non-libertarians, what would it be?
Okay.
If you had to choose a question to
you say
convince
Declaration
people
of Independence.
about
I'm thinking
about
I
the
wouldn't-
FDA's
yeah.
policies being wrong about approving drugs, what would it be? It would be that Matthew McConaughey book, or movie, which was not made by a libertarian. Right?
Yep.
Go, Peter. While Nick is.
I mean, the
playing
moon is a
piccolo.
harsh mistress for anybody under 18 or possibly even people over 18, depending on what they're like. But if they're going to pick a nonfiction book, probably Capitalism and Freedom, which is in some ways maybe not the greatest book at convincing somebody who's already decided that they are definitely not a libertarian. On the other hand, is one of the greatest elucidations of the ideas and principles of kind of free market and libertarian thinking that's ever been said. And the clarity of that book is really just incredible.
Peter? Not Peter. Nick. The other one.
You know what? I'll throw David Bose's Libertarianism primer, which was reissued 20 years later as, I think, The Libertarian Mind. I think it's a good kind of overview that is modern and complicated and sophisticated.
We're going to try to go as fast as possible. We have, I think, about 10 minutes more scheduled here, or that we're physically able to do here. I will start with the answer to this question from Travis Pelham Boozer on Facebook. What's the over-under on Bill Weld 2020? The over is that he will run for sure, I predict, if there's no other super prominent person who announces that he's interested and whose name rhymes with Fluston Schlamash. And next question here I'll do it for Katherine. Abigail Devereaux from Facebook. What do you folks think of Chinese creepy social credit system that reduces all personal, commercial, political behaviors to a single number? Do you have anything to say about that, Katherine?
I have so many things to say about that, but this is a fast round, so I'm going to just very quickly say I have read a lot of science fiction that suggests that actually some sort of social karma, social credit score would actually be a great, awesome way to live in the future. And I am not ready to abandon that vision. But as always, if you take a good idea and you put it in the hands of an authoritarian regime that values the wrong things, you will get a horrible, distorted outcome that results in the deprivation of civil liberties, which is what we will see in China.
Pretty well done. I'm going to send this one to Nick from David Caddick on Twitter. Will it be more important to support libertarian presidential candidates in 2020 compared to strategic voting to remove Trump from office? And they used a small L in the libertarian case. That's
Yeah, I think you should always vote your conscience. I don't really believe in strategic voting in that sense. So all I can say is I'm going to vote for the person who's the most libertarian in 2020, assuming I vote.
Logan Hill from Twitter asks, and I'll direct it to Peter, what are some winning issues for the libertarian movement that could propel them to better success if they focused on it?
National drug legalization, and
Don't they do that already?
But no, but like if they, but in particular,
drugs.
a kind of mushy, technocratic, middle of the road, centrist pot legalization along the lines of what Jonathan Rauch suggests, wrote about in our 50th issue, where he basically says, the way that the pot legalization and gay marriage movements have been won so far is in some ways by talking like a statist, by emphasizing tax revenue and legality and normalcy. And I think that to win this issue at the federal level, we're going to have to sort of like those of us who maybe don't want to see this as sort of just become like a giant tax scheme are going to have to accept some level of that as like a productive, as being much better than the current regime. And so I think that if the LP sort of dialed, or if lowercase l libertarians dialed back a little bit, just a little every now and then about what they sort of the range of outcomes that they might be willing to accept, and said, look, let's do this because it is because the country has changed. People now understand, like the public is now there. Majority of Republicans, I believe, now favor pot legalization. This is a winning issue. It's low-hanging fruit for everyone in any party. We should be doing it at the federal level immediately.
Michael Fiorilli on Twitter asks a question that I'll throw to Katherine. Does the Second Amendment make cops more trigger happy because they can plausibly assume people are armed? That's a good question.
That is a good question. Probably overall, it is fair to say the existence and robustness of the Second Amendment leads to more deaths at the hands of law enforcement. On the other hand, there is, I think, a pretty well-documented pattern of cops using that as a rationalization after the fact, and not necessarily good evidence about what they believed in the moment. People say, "I thought he had a gun," after they shoot someone. That's what they say. We have no idea really what they thought. And one thing that uniform cams and dash cams have shown is that it's very rarely the case that anyone's narrative of the lead up to a shooting is accurate to the reality. So I guess I would just say we shouldn't let cops get away with shooting people because they say the person had a gun. And I am somewhat skeptical that that is always the motivation.
Espada8 on Hit and Run says, we all need Peter's mug. I presume he means his drink receptacle. Where can we get it?
Unfortunately, that is not for sale. That is a prototype mug. When we relaunch the website, which we hope to do shortly, with the help of your Webathon dollars, because making a website ain't free, we will also be relaunching our swag store. And if you are very good little boys and girls, we might let you buy Sex, Drugs, and Robots
It's
mugs.
a good mug.
This one is going to be for all of us, I suppose, from Norman T. Hesterton. And we could use this as a possible bounce out here. And thank you all for watching all the way through on YouTube, Facebook, and wherever else you're following us on audio devices as well. What is the best reason to give to Reason today, Peter?
Because we need to have these mugs made, mass-produced, and available for all of our readers, listeners, lovers, and haters.
Is it about merchandise for you, Nick?
No, it's not about merch. We're your voice in public debates about politics, culture, and ideas from a principled libertarian perspective. And if you like what we're saying, and if you want us to get better and to have better arguments that you can share with your friends, that you can share with your policymakers, etc., we need your money. It helps. It's the difference between us doing what we're doing and not doing what we're doing. So if you think libertarianism, if you think Reason's style, Reason's vision of the world and of a future of expanding individual liberty and individual autonomy is a good thing, that's what your money is going to fund.
Yeah.
It costs money to do what we do. And, this is something that I think other charities, other things you can give your money to, they often just make an appeal to need. They say, listen, what we're doing is important and it costs money. And I think journalists are a little bit loath to do that. But in this case, we really should, because this, like, your donations are the difference between, can we put Elizabeth Nolan Brown on a plane and fly her out to Arizona to go hang out with the founders of Backpage, who are currently under house arrest or pretty close to it, and talk about their story exclusively with her. Your money is the difference between whether we bring Andrew Heaton in here and put a fur hat on him to do something ridiculous. Your money funds Peter Suderman's very important cocktail journalism. And, your money also funds things that take a long time. Good journalism takes a long time. You put in a FOIA request and then you lay down to sleep for 100 years. And if you're CJ Ciaramella, you do this every single day. Every single day you put it in, you just go out to the winds and you say, like, I hope I get a reply. It takes time and resources to do these kinds of things. We are getting information that no one else is getting because we are looking in places that no one else is looking, and you should give us your dollars to do that.
I would add to all of that, which is true and more so. Last year, I think through our entire Webathon exercise, we raised $375,000, which is an incredible amount of money. I mean, it shattered previous records.
We can get like 25, 22-year-olds for that.
You get a lot of 22-year-olds for that. And as importantly, I think it came from more than 1,000 individual donors. And this, many people already subscribe to the magazine, or they don't, or whatever. And it's just $10 here. It's $15, $20 here. You don't understand how resilient that makes us. Think about it for a second. How many magazines out there? It could be a website, but generally speaking, a magazine, a Weekly Standard, a National Review, a Nation, Mother Jones. Would it be totally normal to have the last 20 years worth of editors-in-chief sitting at a table, not forking each other's eyes out, or having a huge kind of a split or a chasm between the overall train and the through line of the editorial product? Stop talking about my metaphors. It's not
metaphors.
right.
God.
It's there's something special about that, and even kind of sacred about that. I can't think of very many magazines that have lasted for this long that it is identifiable. You can always see there are moments when Jack Wheeler's going crazy in 1983. Sure, there's enthusiasms and temporal changes here and there, but it's always been from 1968 on, from the premier issue on. It has been coherence, not contradictions, in the words of Lanny Friedlander. And part of that, an integral part of that, is the way that people are attached to it fundamentally. They donate, again, just $10. They subscribe just a little bit here. But all that creates this sort of mesh that allows it to continue and not be at the whims of a single moment, a single financial crisis, a single whatever. So donate to make that happen and make Katherine be better at what she does, and make Katherine Jr. even better than Katherine can ever imagine before.
It's all about Katherine Jr.
That's so troubling.
Who's going to have CRISPR edited purple hair.
By the way, is there a movement to have women be able to have, like Junior, the third, that kind of? Maybe that's something we should be working on. Okay,
Wait, was that a question from YouTube or from Twitter?
That was a hit and run comment
Instagram,
situation.
Maybe. That was
when I clone myself. Women are waiting for actual cloning to name progeny after ourselves.
Should we close with this? Do we want to do a quick little 4-part harmony thing, or do we have any others? It was worth it.
Yeah.
90 minutes was worth it for that look alone. In closing, go to reason.com, Webathon. All the giving levels are there. It's super easy. Just go click on stuff. Give it all. Thanks for watching. Thanks for all the comments. We couldn't come anywhere close to answering all of these questions, and we love them. It's another thing that we can do that maybe not everybody else gets to do, which is actually interact with the people who make our work possible. So thank you for all of it. Thanks again, and keep on looking out at the reason.com space and hit and run for other fun Webathon stuff over the next 4 or 5 days. And for now, we are out of here. Goodbye.